Well guys, it's that time again. Welcome to the April 2015 APOCABOX Skill Challenge. And this challenge is all about preparing for future fires. The number one way to do that in a survival scenario is to make char cloth. And we're gonna use this little fire kit inside of your APOCABOX to do that. It's not hard to imagine that in a survival scenario, you have a fire, but you're preparing for future fires. Let's say you've used the last of your best fire tinder to make your current and existing fire. What's the best way to prepare for a fire tomorrow or the next day? And in my opinion, one of the most reliable fire starts on planet Earth is char cloth. Now this isn't a new skill by any means, and it's certainly not revolutionary. I'm sure several of you have made char cloth before, but for those of you who have not, the ability to make and use char cloth in a survival scenario is, in my opinion, one of the most important survival skills that you can learn. I'm going to teach you how to make char cloth and then how to use that char cloth to make a fire. Let's get started. Now, if you're going to make char cloth, it's really important to note that you have to have a fire to get started. You have to char materials in the absence of oxygen, or at least in as little presence of oxygen as possible, in a metal container. And you have to have a fire to do that. So if you're gonna do this skill challenge today, you'll need your fire kit, your char cloth kit, and you will need a campfire going. To get started, we're gonna take everything out of this tin, except for the little white cotton squares. Inside of your tin, you're gonna have 2 pieces of jute twine. You're gonna have a very manly mustache fire striker, which I designed and had made just for this APOCABOX, so you guys are the only ones that have one of these. You're gonna have a flint arrowhead, and you're gonna have the tin itself. You'll notice that I've already popped a little hole in the top of my lid. I've just done that with a nail and a rock. It's important to have a little hole in this container. That allows the gases to escape as you char this cotton material. So we're gonna start with the tin completely empty. We're gonna put our cotton squares inside. Go ahead and separate those out individually. Then we're gonna close the tin up, just like that. Make sure you've got a little hole in there, okay? And then this is going to go straight into the fire. Now, like I mentioned, this tin is literally going to go straight into this fire. Doesn't have to be buried in the coals or anything. Right on top is just fine. And it doesn't matter at all if flames are surrounding this tin. Now what's going to happen is this fire, the heat from this fire, is going to char those natural materials inside of that tin in the absence of oxygen. Now, here in a couple of seconds, you're going to start to see smoke coming out of that little hole that we created. That's important because that's an indicator of when your material is charring and when it's done. Now, I'm going to drill in tight with the camera so that you can see that smoke. This is only going to take a couple or 3 minutes. Once the smoke has stopped coming out of this little hole, that means that the charring process is complete and you can take the tin off of the fire. Now, if you look really closely, it's hard to see with the other smoke, but you can see the smoke pouring out of that little hole. And that's going to last for a couple of minutes. And once that's done, we're going to pull that tin off of the fire. Now it's been a few minutes and I've taken my tin off the fire. Do not touch this tin with your hands because it will burn you. Just got a split stick here that I'm using. I'm going to set that tin aside to cool off for a couple of minutes. While that tin is cooling off, I want you to take your 2 pieces of jute twine and I want you to tear those apart. We're going to process those down into their most basic fibrous elements. At the end, it should look like a little hairball. This is going to be the core to your tinder bundle. Okay, this is where we start thinking about using char cloth to make a fire. So process this jute twine down to a little hairball that looks kind of like this right here. To create your tinder bundle, you're going to take some of your packing material from your APOCABOX. In this case, this is a shredded paper, and we're going to put our core, our jute twine core, right in the middle of that. So that should look something like this right here. Okay, we're going to set that aside. And after a couple of minutes, this tin should be cool enough to handle. When you open that up, it's important that the char cloth inside be completely charred black. It should literally look like black cloth, if you can see that against my hand. If there's any white left, then it needs to go back in, and it should be very, very delicate. You should be able to tear it apart with your fingers with no problem at all. We're going to have several pieces of charred material in this tin, but we're going to only need one. Now here's the part that's probably going to be a little bit tricky for some people, and that's actually getting a spark to catch on your char cloth. Now to light this char cloth, we're going to use our carbon steel mustache striker and our flint arrowhead. This is just a classic flint and steel fire start that's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. This was the preferred fire start for most mountain men. Okay, now to start, we're going to take our flint arrowhead. I always like to fold my char cloth over right at the edge of that piece of flint, kind of like this right here. Okay, you can see how my piece of char cloth sticking off the edge of that piece of flint just a little bit. Now I'll hold that char cloth onto that piece of flint, and you got to come down on this with really solid glancing blows. It's a good idea to wear a pair of glasses because you're going to chip off a little bit of this flint each time you do that, and the last thing you want is a sharp piece of flint in your eye. So we're going to hold our flint with our char cloth on top, and the idea is to strike off a little spark that lands onto that char cloth. Now this is going to take a little bit of practice. Now you'll notice I'm not babying this flint. I'm really coming down on it. I'm really striking it hard. And maybe you want to practice striking a little bit before you start practicing with the char cloth. That way you're confident in your ability to get strikes. Now, the sharper the edge of the piece of flint, the better the spark you're going to get. Now, don't get frustrated if this takes a little bit of time, because it definitely takes a little bit of practice. And there we go. It's going to be hard to see in this light. I hope you can see it. But you can see a little smoldering red ember growing through that char cloth. Now, once you see that ember growing through that char cloth, that's when you want to place it inside of your tinder bundle. I'm going to place it onto my jute twine. I'm going to wrap it up in here a little bit so that it's enclosed. And I'm going to start giving it a little bit of air. You want to blow that heat right into that jute twine. The general rule of thumb is the more smoke you see, the harder you can blow. And there we go. Now we have fire. Now, making a fire with flint and steel takes a little bit of practice, so don't get frustrated. Try striking your steel on your flint before using your char cloth. You may have to make several batches of char cloth before you understand how to get it to work. But like all survival skills, the time to practice is before you need them. The time to figure out how to use flint and steel and make char cloth is right now, before you're in a survival scenario and your life depends on making it work. I really hope that you've enjoyed this month's skills challenge. I think it's one of the most important survival skills that you can learn. Now, I would challenge you to char natural materials, because you may not have the luxury of having cotton or linen in the field in a survival scenario, and you might be forced to use dried grasses and punky wood. So I would challenge you to try to char natural materials and use your flint and steel to light those and create a fire. So good luck in the field. Thanks for being an APOCABOX subscriber. I can't wait to teach you more survival skills in future boxes. And remember, it's not if, but when.